We begin this hour, though, with President Biden taking the world stage, set to address an in-person audience at the United Nations 76th Annual General Assembly.
President Biden is expected to address key issues like the pandemic, climate change, the Afghanistan withdrawal, and his latest submarine deal with Australia and the UK.
He kicked off his visit to New York by participating in a bilateral meeting with the United Nations Secretary General yesterday. The president said the partnership between the United States and the UN is based on common values and principle.
The vision of the United Nations has never been short in ambition, any more than our Constitution. But the ambition matters. Today, governments must continue to work together in a system built on international law to deliver equitable prosperity, peace, and security for everyone.
Later today, leaders from the U.S. and U.K. will head to Washington with Prime Minister Boris Johnson set to visit the White House tonight. It will be their first meeting there during the Biden presidency. NBC News White House correspondent Jeff Bennett is following the president today here in New York. Jeff, President Biden's New York stint began last night. What tone did he set for his first General Assembly?
Hey, Joe, good morning. It's good to see you. Well, the message the president brought here to the UN General Assembly is a familiar one, and it's familiar because it's the same thing he said to the allies when he toured Europe back in June, attending the G7 and NATO summits there. And that message is America is back, and that is precisely what he said yesterday as he was sitting alongside the UN Secretary General. So expect the president today, when he speaks at 10 a.m. Eastern, to talk in depth and in detail about the challenges not only the U.S. faces, but the challenges that the global community face. That includes, chiefly, COVID and climate change. On COVID, expect the president to talk about the ways in which he intends to rally world ambition to increase the pace of vaccinations. The complicating factor there, of course, is that it was the World Health Organization just last week that criticized the initial U.S. plan to roll out booster shots, giving Americans effectively a third dose before so much of the world has even gotten their first dose of the COVID vaccine. On climate, same thing. Expect him to sort of rally world support to cut carbon emissions dramatically over the next 2 decades. The complicating factor there is that in this country, climate policy is wrapped up in that reconciliation bill, that $3.5 trillion social spending bill. And the future of that, Joe, as you well know, is unclear right now.
So, Jeff, now as world leaders come together, the White House is trying to do damage control in its relationship with a key ally, France, after striking a deal to provide nuclear-powered subs to Australia. Is the president expected to say anything or address this today at the General Assembly?
Not specifically in his speech, but you're right. I mean, it's an important story. It's a development that's sort of playing out against the president's appearance here. The fact that the French are publicly upset. I mean, there was this diplomatic dust-up that they felt entirely left out of this national security agreement among the U.S., UK, and Australia, thereby not letting France get into what would have been a very lucrative military contract for them. Don't expect the president to speak specifically about that. But there is a part of this trip that is focused on fence mending, not just the public spat with French officials, but also to include the U.S. exit from Afghanistan, the allies feeling, some of them, that they weren't fully consulted in the range of decision-making there.
And Jeff, President Biden's diplomatic work doesn't end after his speech today. Of course, it never really ends. But as we mentioned, he has a meeting at the White House with UK's Prime Minister. What's expected to come from that?
Yeah, it's interesting. They could have had what's known as a pull-aside here at the UN, where literally an official will pull another aside in one of the hallways here and have a conversation. It was important to Boris Johnson and the Brits to have that White House backdrop. So that meeting will happen back in Washington, D.C. later today. You can expect that they will talk about some of the tensions over the Afghanistan exit that we just addressed. But really, it's a chance for the two to reaffirm the U.S. commitment to the U.K. Don't expect any gaffes, any sort of miscalculations or any sort of embarrassments there. It's really just a chance for the two of them to sit and talk to one another.
And Boris Johnson spoke with our Savannah Guthrie. We'll have more on that in the next hour. Jeff Bennett here in New York. Jeff, thanks so much.
This month, September 2021, is now on track to be the deadliest month in the coronavirus pandemic since February. So far, more than 32,000 Americans have died from COVID in September. An average of 2,000 people are dying every day, numbers we haven't seen since the winter surge. Nationwide, cases are starting to decline, but the overall infection rate is still high. And COVID is far from going away. That's especially the case in Iowa, where the Des Moines Register says, on average, someone reported positive for COVID-19 about once every 50 seconds over the past 7 days. Joining me now from Des Moines is NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber. Ellison, good morning. So first, just tell us, with numbers like that, how are hospitals doing across the state?
They're under pressure. I mean, resources, personnel, those things are limited, and they are seeing jumps in infection rates in this state that they really have not seen since January. When you look at hospitalizations, 90%, according to the state's health department, of people who are in ICUs in this state because of COVID-19 are unvaccinated. Statewide, about 65% of Iowans over the age of 18 are fully vaccinated, but the numbers they're seeing right now are raising a lot of eyebrows and worrying a lot of health officials. Savannah?
Absolutely. And now that's kind of the bigger, broader picture. And let's talk about some of these individual stories. I mean, I know that you spoke with a woman whose husband died of COVID even after getting the vaccine, even as people who were taking it seriously, wearing masks, doing all the right things. What did she tell you about her experience?
Yeah, she told us that she and her husband, Gary, they attended a gathering about a month ago, early August, and that there were a lot of people there. She said it was indoors. No one wore masks. They were fully vaccinated, but others were not. Both she and her husband had pre-existing conditions, but they'd been fully vaccinated for months. They say that they came into contact with someone who was not vaccinated, and both of them got sick. In all, they say about a dozen people attending this event contracted COVID-19. Ardith, Gary's wife, she survived after getting sick. Her husband, Gary, did not. She and Gary's immediate family, they are angry because they feel like this was entirely avoidable. And in their obituary, they made it very clear how Gary got sick, writing this in part, quote, Gary's life was unnecessarily cut short. He was one of several victims recently infected from an unmasked, unvaccinated person. Here's more of what his wife told us. Did you ever have a moment where you thought, well, why did we even bother getting vaccinated if this was still going to happen? How come?
No, I'm still alive. And everybody thought it would kill me. I have family members that don't agree with me. And I guess that's their right. But Gary and I had rights too. And he doesn't have them anymore. So I just want people to listen and maybe change their minds about how they feel.
And she told us she and Gary's children are trying to use this opportunity to encourage others to get vaccinated. And if they're not vaccinated, to follow the protocols that we know help prevent the spread. She says she and her family, they wish they'd never attended that event. Gary was 77 years old, but his wife said he had so much more life to live. Savannah, his newest grandson was born days after he passed away.
Oh, Ellison, that is just heartbreaking to hear. Thank you so much for your reporting.
Let's bring in Dr. Amish Adulja. He's a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Dr. Adulja, good to have you with us. I mean, we just heard that heartbreaking story there from Ellison. Help us understand, how common are breakthrough cases? What should people know about them, even if they're vaccinated, and what their risks are right now?
So breakthrough infections are still relatively rare. They're not to be expected if you've been fully vaccinated, but they do occur. And there are some estimates of maybe 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000 per day that's the risk. And it sometimes is more frequent when you're talking about some of the variants like the Delta variant versus other versions of the virus, for example, the Alpha variant. So this is something that we're going to see. And breakthrough infections were expected, but when they're severe, that's extremely rare. To see someone die from a breakthrough infection is not the norm. What we know is that our vaccines are extremely, extremely good at protecting against serious disease, hospitalization, and death. And so to hear that story, it's one of the exceptions to the rule, but I think it really it underscores the fact that vaccination is always going to be the best method, but there are going to be some of these cases. This is why there's a debate over boosters, especially for those above the age of 65, like this individual you're talking about. But it is something that I think we're going to have to face every now and then, that these types of severe infections occur.
Now, Doctor, we're also learning more about the possibility of a booster shot for the one-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine, something that a lot of people have been waiting on. J&J says its vaccine does hold up well against the different COVID variants, but new data shows it's 94% effective 2 months after the first dose to get that booster. But the company says after 6 months, the booster provides more protection. What do you make of this data, and what does it mean considering the FDA's recent decision on those Pfizer booster shots?
There had been a lot of talk from the very beginning that Johnson & Johnson might try to develop a 2-dose version of their vaccine. Their single-dose vaccine does work very well against serious disease, but they were studying a 2-dose regimen to see could it be any better, and it does look like it may be better. And I think this is going to be something that they'll actually publish the data on. This is just a press release we're seeing today. And then the FDA will look at that information and decide, should the Johnson & Johnson vaccine become a 2-dose regimen? Should it be considered a booster that you get? But this is all going to be something that's going to play out over the next weeks and months to really optimize the way we're using these vaccines and decide which groups benefit from 2 doses, which groups are okay with 1 dose, just like we saw with the Pfizer type of discussion that happened last week and will continue this week.
And Dr. Adulja, Pfizer came out with data yesterday saying its vaccine is safe for kids between 5 and 11. Here's what Dr. Anthony Fauci told our Tom Yamas about that last night on Top Story here on NBC News Now.
I have every reason to believe that the data are going to show, which they claim it does, that this vaccine is safe and induces the kind of immune response in children that you would predict would protect them. So I wouldn't think at all that parents need to worry. Vaccines don't go into anyone in this country unless the FDA gives its regulatory approval, and that would be the next step.
So, Doctor, my question is, health officials are still having trouble convincing some adults to get the vaccine. So if the parents aren't getting the shot, what do you think is going to happen once more children are eligible? Are you worried many of them won't get the shot?
There definitely is going to be vaccine hesitancy. We can just anticipate it in the parents of 5 to 11-year-olds because there's vaccine hesitancy in the parents of 12 to 17-year-olds, who only about 50% have gotten vaccination. So we are going to face that same problem. And I think that's why it's really important that people have confidence in the process, that this is a safe and effective vaccine, that they used a different dose, that there was a completely different trial done. But we are hitting that wall where many people don't want to get vaccinated and they don't want their kids to get vaccinated. And I think this is a challenge. And I don't think that we expected this would be what would be holding up control of the pandemic. But I do know when this vaccine does eventually get emergency use authorization for people 5 to 11, that there's going to be parents that line up on the first day. And in general, more vaccine shots into people's arms, even if they don't get to 100% of the 5 to 11 group, is still going to be something that proves an obstacle for the virus. The more immunity we have in our population, the harder it is for this virus to spread, and the less disruptive COVID-19 becomes, especially to schools that are trying to stay in-person learning this year.
All right, Dr. Amish Adulja, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Troubling new images are coming in from the Haitian migrant crisis at the southern border, and we want to warn you, they are disturbing. They appear to show a U.S. Border Patrol agent in Del Rio, Texas, on horseback, chasing migrants trying to get to the United States. NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now. Julia, now these pictures have been widely shared. They're causing quite a bit of backlash. And yesterday, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas was asked about them when he was at the border. What did he say? And what is the rest of the Biden administration saying about what these images seem to show?
Well, there seems to be a difference between what Secretary Mayorkas said and what Jen Psaki said from the White House yesterday. Secretary Mayorkas said that they need to take time to be able to see this picture from a different angle. And Jen Psaki said they were obviously horrific. Now, there is quite a lot of debate about this picture, and I would definitely encourage viewers to take a close look at it. What appears to be happening is that an agent is on horseback grabbing a migrant by the shirt while his horse reins dangle. But a lot of people have seen a lot of discussion on Twitter border talk about, are those reins being used as a whip? It's not clear to me that they are. DHS has yet to put out a statement on this. I do have new reporting that this incident has been referred internally to Customs and Border Protection's Office of Professional Responsibility. They're the ones who conduct investigations on employees. I will say from my own experience, I've seen immigrants apprehended when they're crossing the border illegally. They do get grabbed by the shirt. They do get thrown to the ground. It's much like an arrest that you would see a police officer do from someone who is on the run. It can be quite jarring and quite disturbing. And I think that's what we're seeing firsthand here. But I do want to have a bigger conversation about what exactly we're seeing in this picture and get some answers before we start saying this man is being whipped, because it's not immediately clear. So that's the best I can do for now on that picture, but it is something to look at and something to discuss.
No, absolutely, and that's very important context, and we should certainly wait for that information before we make any type of definitive call on what's happening there. Now, Julia, you report that more than 20,000 Haitians are now in Colombia and could possibly migrate north to the U.S. Can you tell us more about the conditions they're facing, where they're headed, and what might happen given the numbers that we are already seeing that's overwhelming this particular border town?
That's right. So we obtained new documents last night. These are internal documents shared within DHS that they're monitoring other pockets of Haitian migrants, Haitians who left the island nation and went to other countries like Colombia and Peru, and they're watching as they may try to now come to the United States. It's sort of the way you would have seen a caravan gather in the past. They say that 20,000 have basically amassed in a northern Colombia city, and that they're watching to see if they may too try to immigrate to the United States. What's happening here and why it's different from groups we've seen in the past is that they're bigger and oftentimes they move faster. And it is obviously triggered by the horrible events in Haiti, where these people now feel like they left their home, they can't go back because of the political and natural disasters that have come and shaken their nation even more so than it already was when they left. And a lot of the economic opportunities have dried up in these Central American and South American nations where they've been living. So they may now choose to move. The issue is just the overwhelming numbers and the fact that DHS can't really handle these 15,000 now. So what happens when more come?
Absolutely. And Julia, those conditions that you mentioned is causing many to say that they're coming here to seek asylum. So what is the status of deportations along the border? What's happening when somebody comes and says, I'm seeking asylum? What's happening to families? Walk us through the latest.
Well, it really depends on who you are. Right now, the Biden administration is still using Title 42. That's that Trump-era authority that they started under the first days of the pandemic to expel immigrants, even those who are seeking asylum outside of the United States. It used to mean pushing them back into Mexico. Mexico essentially said, we're at capacity. So many of them are actually being flown back to Haiti. But still, for single children who come unaccompanied and families who are seeking asylum, we understand they will have a chance to stay here and seek asylum.
All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much. And again, much needed and very important context so that we're not spreading any type of misinformation when we see images like that. Thank you so much for your reporting this morning.
We've seen sobering images from the southern border where thousands of Haitian migrants are hoping to enter the U.S. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard takes a closer look at just how far some migrants travel to get to the border and the dangers they faced along the way.
Deep in the jungle in Panama, parents clinging to their children, bracing for the hundreds of miles ahead. Thousands of migrants, many of them Haitian, hoping to soon reach the United States. But this is just one stop on a journey that for many extends more than a decade and thousands of miles. One that requires passing through here, the treacherous mountainous jungle called the Darien Gap near the border of Panama and Colombia.
Todo está muy difícil para nosotros. Pero la cosa está así, tiene que hacerlo para buscar una vida nueva.
Panamanian officials say about 70,000 migrants have made the trek this year alone. Most of these Haitians now arriving to the U.S. border have lived in Central or South America for years, finding refuge there after the 2010 earthquake that killed more than 200,000 in their homeland. They fled for countries like Chile and Brazil, which at the time needed workers and initially even offered humanitarian visas.
Just how large of a Haitian population there is that has been residing over the last 10 years in South America, in Central America.
These are individuals who left earlier periods of unrest and went to countries like Chile in the tens of thousands to be able to find some sort of security there.
Haiti's foreign minister in 2016 told the Miami Herald that 40,000 Haitians were living in Ecuador at the time, another 60,000 in Chile, and more than 95,000 in Brazil. But now, years later, as the pandemic endures and countries' economies increasingly tighten, many of those migrants set off to find refuge yet again, but further north. Now, a remarkable number in distress, waiting at the doorstep of America. But their route will not end here, the Biden administration says. Most will be removed from the country under a COVID-era public health policy.
They're maintaining Trump-era policies, but I think that there's a perception that perhaps they are being more welcoming than they actually are. People want to leave. There's a perception perhaps that the Biden administration might be more welcoming despite of the realities of the ground.
Their destination, now the very place they first fled, the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere.
Time to get a check on your morning news now weather.
Which, of course, means that Bill Cairns is here now. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Hey, good morning. So we got some great weather and we got some areas that are going to need umbrellas today. Nothing severe. We're not worried about tornadoes or anything like that. Tropics are still active, but everything's out to sea. So we're mostly just going to focus on these areas of rain. And how about Savannah, Georgia yesterday? 6 inches of rain. We thought there was a chance for some heavy rain, but that was ridiculous. So this morning, we're really tracking the heaviest rain in areas of the Midwest, trying to push into the Ohio Valley. Chicago hasn't been too bad. We had some thunderstorms overnight that woke some people up around St. Louis, and now those storms are sweeping through southern Illinois and into Indiana. Also some storms there as you head down from Springfield into the Ozarks of northern Arkansas. So for today, we'll watch those storms pushing into Indiana. Interstate 70 won't be a fun drive. Detroit, bring your umbrella for storms later on today. And from Charlotte to Roanoke, we're going to get some decent rain. And then just a really soaking downpour type day from Cincinnati all through Ohio, Pittsburgh, Buffalo tomorrow, Roanoke. So again, if you're on the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic, the high population cities from D.C. to Boston, you're good until Wednesday evening, but then Wednesday evening and Thursday is when that mess will be in the Northeast. So enjoy today if you can. So the forecast for rainfall, heaviest North Carolina, Virginia, areas of Pennsylvania, and especially there in the Ohio Valley. So for today, as I said, enjoy it. 75 and mostly sunny in New York. And how about Texas, guys? It was 100 yesterday in Dallas. Today is 85. That'll feel enjoyable.
Get your coat. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Bill.
Yes.
Bill, see you soon.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.